Executive Director of the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, or APSIA, as you all probably know it. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar with an introduction to the Boren Graduate Fellowship. And I'm very pleased to have Jeff Carey, who leads marketing and outreach for the Boren, join us to walk us through the different opportunities and nuts and bolts of applying to the fellowship. And I'm also glad to have so many of my colleagues and students from across APSIA schools online with us. And I wanted to note that we will be recording this presentation. So thanks to Jeff for letting us post it on our YouTube page. It will be available afterwards. And we will also do our best to share whatever further information we have on Boren with you through our schools and through our social media. And so with that, Jeff, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. I also wanted to note one last thing. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to type them in that chat box, and we'll take them all, particularly at the end, unless Jeff feels like responding to you all sooner. So with that, Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you, Carmen. Yeah, just to add with the questions in the chat, you might ask some, and some of them will be things that I'll get to in later slides, and then anything else we'll try to save to the end, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions because I know folks do have questions. I myself am a graduate of an APSIA institution. I went to Georgetown's Master of Science in Foreign Service program, and while I was there as a graduate student, I did receive a Boren Fellowship to go and study Arabic, and that Arabic prepared me for a career stint in the Foreign Service. I was in for about 8.5 years, using my Arabic in some posts, other languages in others, but I can definitely attest to the value of this program, and also that having attended an APSIA school, I know that this is right in your wheelhouse. Boren Awards are for people who are interested in careers with the federal government, and I know that describes a lot of your students, and also I know that a lot of your students have an interest and probably a requirement to acquire a foreign language, and Boren focuses specifically on those languages that have great value to the U.S. government. So not only is this a path to achieving language skills, it's also gives them an inside track into a number of federal jobs later on down the line. Before I get started in my presentation, I would like to just get a sense of the institutional roles of some of the folks who are attending the presentation, because I know that students were invited as well as administrators. If you wouldn't mind, if you're by the chat box, please just type in what your title is at your institution, because that'll give me a sense of who I'm talking to. And if you're a student, just write student, that's fine. Okay, so far I'm seeing a few students. So I will kind of gear my presentation toward that. Oh great, we've also got someone in career services. So hopefully this will be nice and relevant to everyone. This is an interesting time to present on Boren because we've just announced the results for the 2019 competition. The 2020 competition is still a few months off. It begins in August. I'm going to go ahead and skip past this slide about the other programs that IIE administers on behalf of the U.S. government. There are a number of them. Fulbright is something you're probably familiar with as well, and I will just stop for a moment to say that a strong Fulbright candidate will often make a very strong Boren candidate, or vice versa. We have a lot of people who win Boren Awards as undergraduates and then go on to do Fulbright after they graduate, and then sometimes go on to do Boren Fellowships later on. So it is very compatible with also participating in Fulbright. So don't feel like you or your students need to choose between those two programs. Because we are between the application cycles, I did want to add this disclaimer to today's presentation. The information that I'm going to present to you, unless otherwise noted, is based on the 2019 Boren Awards application cycle. So we may change a number of things in the program between now and then. I don't expect them to change drastically, but it's possible that we will add or subtract some preferred countries or languages. We may adjust our selection criteria or our application process, but I don't expect it to be drastic for those of you who are familiar with Boren from previous application cycles. The Boren Awards, just as a very quick overview, those were created by the David L. Boren National Security Act of 1991. The first set of awards from this program were issued in 1994. And the Boren Awards specifically are a subset of the National Security Education Program, and they comprise both undergraduate scholarships as well as graduate fellowships. So today I'm just going to be focused on those graduate fellowships, but for those of you who have friends, family, people that you work with who are eligible for the undergraduate award, just know that the selection criteria for that are going to be pretty similar to what we're looking for in a graduate student, although we do try to give graduate students more flexibility in designing their programs. But what both the scholarships have and fellowships have in common is that they are focused on longer-term study abroad. We're looking for people who want to go abroad, ideally for 6 months or longer. And the reason we want them to do that is because we want them to have immersive study of a foreign language. We find, and there's a lot of data to back this up, including a report on oral language proficiency that we have published online, showing the value of longer-term immersive study to language acquisition at all levels of proficiency. And the reason we want folks to really invest in these deeper language skills is because there is a need for this in the federal government, in public service, and that is specifically what the National Security Education Act was written to try to address. Some of you may have participated in or be familiar with the Critical Languages Scholarship, and that has a lot of similarities. For one thing, all of the languages that CLS funds are languages that we would also fund, but we cover a lot more languages, and we do have a really direct path into work with the federal government. So again, if you have considered or applied to the or received the Critical Languages Scholarship, you are still eligible and will probably make a very strong candidate for the Boren Awards. Okay, let me show you something, and you'll be the first group I've presented to so far that sees this information. These are the numbers from the past year's application cycle. And as you can see, we receive a lot more undergraduate applications than we receive graduate applications. And the odds of receiving an award as a graduate student are quite strong. Right now, and I probably should have calculated this earlier, but the exact percentage is 38.8%. So more than a third of our graduate applicants this year are receiving an award, and over a quarter of our undergraduates. Now, we would like to see more graduate applications. We would like to give more graduate awards, but because we're seeing a bit of a downturn in graduate applications, at the same time we're seeing an uptick in undergraduate applications, we've had to shift some of our resources into providing more awards for undergraduates. The bottom line for you as graduate students is that there is a lot of additional opportunity here to receive an award. The odds are already very good, and if we get more graduate applicants, we will start to give more graduate awards again. So again, those of you that are studying in an APSIA school, you are already at an institution that is designed to develop skills in the field of international affairs and to prepare you, many of you, for careers with the federal government. So all of you should at least be considering applying to this award. APSIA is where we get some of our best applicants, and certainly a large percentage of our applicants are coming from APSIA schools. Basic eligibility requirements are pretty simple. You do need to be a U.S. citizen at the time of application, but we have people who are naturalized citizens receiving this award. You do need to be planning to study a foreign language. And you must be matriculated in a degree program at a U.S. institution. So that means that while you are receiving the award, you need to be considered a student in good standing at in a master's degree program or a PhD program or another graduate level degree program if you want to be eligible for the Boren Fellowships. If anybody has any questions about matriculation and how that works, let's save it until the end and we can come back there. But suffice it to say that if you're a master's candidate or will be a PhD candidate, you are an eligible applicant for this for the Boren Fellowship. Okay, the next 3 slides I like to spend a good amount of time on because it's really important that everyone understand what our selection criteria are. I want to make sure that if you are considering applying for this, that you are writing your essays to answer the questions that we are asking. You know, Fulbright, for example, is looking for a gregarious citizen diplomat. So they are much more focused on you writing a personal statement about yourself. Now, with Boren, we're very interested in who you are, but what we're much more focused on is the question of what you can do to enhance U.S. national security. What can you do as a prospective employee of the federal government? So the first thing that we ask you to address is the national security justification for why you want to study in this particular country, why you want to study this particular language. National security, of course, is a term that is often interpreted to mean more of the hard defense and security policy, and certainly there are plenty of people who apply for Boren who are interested in those topics. But we're also looking for people who are interested in anything related to diplomacy and anything related to international development. There are also a whole host of other fields of study, other fields of work that address the challenges of a global society, which is sort of how we sum up the concept of national security. So if you're working in business and economics and finance, there are, of course, a lot of repercussions for those topics in U.S. national security. If you are doing scientific research, talk about the international impact of that. But what we really want you to do is to focus in on a fairly narrow area of policy that you have an academic interest in, and make a specific, detailed, and focused argument for why that is important to U.S. national security. We're asking you to do some research, some study, and tell us why you believe the topic that you're interested in is important. What we don't want you to do is to give us a very broad overview of U.S. relations with that particular country. If a country is on our preferred list, we know that it's an important country, but what we want you to do is explain what specifically you're interested in and its national security ramifications. The reason that we're so adamant that you focus on national security is because we also want you to be thinking in terms of a field of public policy in which you would like to work and the federal agencies where you can employ those skills and those interests. Later on in this presentation, I'll talk to you a bit more about where Boren alumni actually end up working. But what we want you to do is to do some research into where someone with your particular set of academic interests and professional goals could find important, interesting employment in the federal government. Everyone who receives a Boren Fellowship commits to working for the federal government for at least 1 year. But we are going to try to give preference for, and we are going to try to select students who demonstrate a longer-term commitment to working in the federal government. And the way that we see that most of the time in applications is students really going into some detail about the application process and the skills that they bring, that they understand how they would go about landing these jobs, that they understand that the field of public policy is something that is part of an interagency effort across the federal government and that can articulate a few different options for how they might want to proceed with pursuing a federal career. It's really important to us, it's really important to our panelists to see that the applicants are genuinely interested in pursuing these jobs. You will receive a number of advantages over other applicants to those jobs, but we want to make sure that you are going to be motivated through the application process to pursue these things. And then finally, we're looking for people who have a serious interest in language and culture. It says here before, during, and after Boren, but during and after are the most important phrases here. We do have people that come at languages as beginners through Boren. Now, if you're doing that, you do need to give a pretty compelling justification for why you think it's a good idea to take on a brand new language. I would say that more often it's the case with graduate applicants that they have already done some study of the language and just want to get deeper into it. Regardless of your initial proficiency level, however, we want to make sure that you are setting realistic expectations for your proficiency gains and that you are selecting an overseas program that's appropriate to achieve those goals. So if you're beginner or intermediate, you want to at least start out in, if not spend all of your time in a traditional language program that's really focused on getting you, building your vocabulary, teaching you the rules, and getting you immersed in the acquisition of the language. However, particularly at the grad level, we are also seeing a lot of applicants who already have a strong command of the language. We have people who consider the language they study under Boren to be their first language. But what they are doing is they are selecting programs that are appropriate to that high level. So they're focused on either taking courses taught in the language in their subject matter or doing other work that enhances their subject matter vocabulary, their public speaking, their academic writing. So whatever your level, it is possible to select a program, to design a program that is appropriate to Boren and that will help you achieve your language goals. I'm just going to pause for a second just to see if anyone has any questions about those three principal selection criteria: the national security, public service, and language and culture. If I don't see anything in the next moment, I'll just move on. Okay, so the maximum award for graduate students, the most that you can receive is $30,000. Now, most of that will be spent overseas, and the amount of money that you can receive for your overseas study depends on the duration that you spend overseas. So we are ideally looking for people who want to go abroad 6 months or longer. We give equal preference to any application of over 6 months. The only main difference between the 6 to 9 month span and the 9 to 12 month span is the total amount of money that you can receive for the overseas study. We also give graduate students the option to do a summer domestic intensive language program before they go overseas. And a lot of grad students like that option because either they're starting a new language and they want to get the fundamentals taken care of before they're put into a more immersive environment, or they have studied the language but a long time ago and want to kind of shake off the rust before they go overseas. The only thing that I want to drive home there is that your total overseas award amount is based on your duration, and then the remainder up to $30,000 may be applied to a domestic program. And then the most total that you could apply to the domestic is $12,000. The remainder would then have to be spent abroad. If anybody's got any very specific questions about that, it's probably best just to email us or call us directly, because there's a lot to talk through there if you are designing your own program. We did just receive one question, so I'm just going to step back real quickly to public service. Tish asks, does the year of public service have to occur immediately after the Boren Fellowship is completed? The answer is no, but it should happen soon. For people who have finished their last degree that they're planning to pursue for a while, we're targeting about a 2-year gap before they would have begun a new federal job. So there's a lot of time to look in that period. But if you are going on to do an additional degree, so let's say you're a master's student and you want to go do a JD, or you're a master's student and you want to go do a PhD, we will keep hitting pause on the time when you should begin fulfilling your service until you're done with those later degrees. Now, if during that period of doing another degree, you happen to do an internship or some work with a federal agency, that will count toward fulfillment of the service requirement. And if we get to 2 years after you've completed your degree and you still haven't found a job, the National Security Education Program is probably just going to work closer with you to try to find some good options for you. You can certainly begin to work with them earlier, but if you're having some trouble, they are there to help. They're not there to put undue pressure on you to seek a job immediately. Rather, they want you to be to find a place where you feel comfortable, where you are putting your skills to use. So they will work with you to help you achieve that. Okay. So again, award amounts, maximum total is $30,000. What do we fund? So for graduate students, typically graduate students will design their own programs. They will find their own language schools overseas, and they will combine that with other pursuits. Language study is the one non-negotiable element of a study plan for a graduate student. So a graduate student, if they want, can participate in the same kind of traditional language school that many of the undergraduate students opt for. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of those programs are a mix of undergraduate and graduate students, and some grad students just want to really focus in on the language. But we have people that have other interests, want to do some research perhaps related to a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation. They perhaps want to engage in an internship related to their field of study, or they would like, as I mentioned earlier, people with really advanced language studies sometimes will use Boren to fund enrollment in a year of courses at a local institution. So someone who already has, say, advanced Russian and wants to take courses taught in Russian at a university in Kazakhstan could go ahead and do that, and they would build that subject matter vocabulary and practice their academic writing while being in an immersive language environment. So that would count as part of the language study. If anybody has any questions about program design, I'm happy to answer those at the end. The Boren funding will cover almost all of the costs that you can think of related to this overseas study. We'll fly you there and back. We'll cover your program tuition and materials. We do have some limited allowances for graduate students for equipment related to their research, but we're not going to buy a laptop or anything like that for you. But if you need, say, to have a membership at the National Archives in the country where you are, you can include that as a program cost. And we'll cover lodging and food, local transportation, etc. I don't think I need to go into too much detail on that. Okay, the next 3 slides I'm just going to touch on briefly, but I really do encourage all of you to look into these programs. We have, as a subset of our awards for both undergraduate and graduate students, what we call the regional language initiatives. One is in Africa, one is in South Asia, India specifically, and one is in Indonesia. And with all 3 of these, we've taken the guesswork out of finding a program. We have a domestic intensive language program and a fall overseas program that provide credit from accredited American universities. They give you language instruction, and you do have the opportunity to continue into the spring in a program you design or identify yourself. So you can stay on in the country to do your own research after the language courses have concluded. I'm just suggesting that you consider this if you either have already studied one of these languages and want to continue your study of it to a greater degree of proficiency, or if you are interested in starting one of these languages as a beginner, French being the only exception there. All of the other languages in these initiatives you can do as a beginner, and they are all very much in demand by the federal government, which is why we've created these special regional language initiatives to teach them. So for the African Flagship Languages Initiative, all 6 of the languages are taught as part of a summer domestic program, and then you would then go overseas to do a fall intensive language program. Now we provide you with instruction in French in Senegal, Portuguese in Mozambique, or Swahili in Tanzania. For the other 3 languages on that chart, you would need to identify your own program in that language. The South Asian Flagship Languages Initiative is taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison over the summer, and then in India in the fall. You can study either Hindi or Urdu, and then, as with the African, you may continue into the spring if you so choose in a program that you identify yourself. And then finally, we have the Indonesian Flagship Languages Initiative, which is going to be going into its 3rd year in 2020, and we're really excited about this one. Indonesia is very much an important strategic country in the world, and one that the federal government is looking for people who speak its language. There are a lot of employment opportunities throughout the federal government for people specialized in Indonesia, so if you know that you're interested in some of those topics and would like to learn a new language, the Indonesian Flagship Languages Initiative is actually very well suited to beginners. So this is a great opportunity for those of you who know that you want a federal position but don't quite know what language or country you want to specialize in yet. Give some serious consideration to Indonesia, as well as to the countries in the African and South Asian Flagship Languages Initiatives, because those programs are designed for beginners. Again, the exception is French. French is only available to people with intermediate or better proficiency, but I think there are many of you that fit into that category, so please consider bringing your French skills up to the next level by spending some time in Francophone Africa. Okay, so for those of you who do not apply for the language initiatives, the regional language initiatives, you will be asked to design your own program. And we have some preferences that we hope you will meet in terms of duration, country, language, and field of study. Ideally, you will meet all of these preferences. It may be possible, if not meeting the preference, to still receive the award, but to do so, you do have to make an especially strong national security argument. So the first of these is duration overseas. And as you can see here, both our undergraduate and graduate award recipients are going abroad much longer than the typical American student who studies overseas. For the graduate students, over 90% of them are going for 6 months or longer, which is how we define a year. It is still possible to win the award for a 3 to 6 month span. As you can see, about 7.5% of our recipients this year are doing that. But the longer you go, or if you go over 6 months, you will have a better chance of receiving the award. We also have certain preferred countries. Any country that is shaded in either blue or green on this map is a preferred country. But for the countries that are in blue, we tell people that we may not be able to send you there next year. We don't expect to be able to send you there next year. And so you will need to give us a backup option where you can study the same language. Now, some of these countries like Russia, unfortunately, we don't expect to put back on the list anytime soon. The same is true of, say, Pakistan and a few others. But this map that you're seeing on the screen is 2019's map, and I can already tell you that some of these countries that are shaded in blue may turn green between now and next year. Now, I don't know what those are going to be, but I will tell you that this year we have approved graduate awards to both Ukraine and Kenya, so those are very likely going to shift back to green, or at least we could consider them to be light blue. So any of these countries is a country that we have a preference for. We also have preferences for certain languages, and here they are arranged by region. I want to point out a couple of things real quick. First, in Africa, any language indigenous to an African country that's on our map is considered a preferred language. There are just too many of them to list individually. Also in Africa, French is only a preferred language if done through that African Flagship Languages Initiative. So I just want to remind everyone of that. Finally, in America, I do want to point out that there's a pretty wide discrepancy between the number of preferred languages, right? We just have Haitian and Portuguese, and the number of preferred countries. You'll see a lot of Spanish-speaking countries here shaded green or blue. Um, we do occasionally give awards for the study of Spanish in a Spanish-speaking country. It has to be advanced, and the student needs to explain to us what the national security ramifications are of their work. But I would say that we give out, 2 or 3 of those awards between the undergraduates and graduates every year. So if you are really focused on Latin America and you feel like you've got a strong command of Spanish already and a strong desire to build on those academic skills, you could consider applying as a Spanish student. We do also have some limited opportunities for people who are interested in Latin American indigenous languages, and we really just handle those case by case. But your better bet if you're interested in Latin America would be either to study Haitian Creole, which I understand is, a country with its own specific culture and issues that may not necessarily cross over, or if you're a speaker of Spanish, Portuguese study in Brazil is another opportunity for you. And a lot of people will find programs in Brazil that are designed for people who already speak Spanish to transition into the study of Portuguese. So that's another opportunity for you if you're interested in Latin America. We do have some slight preferences for certain fields of study. I would expect that every field of study that is offered at an APSIA program is within our field of study preferences. Basically, anything related to political science, public policy, law, anything related to business, economics, or finance, anything related to language and area studies, social sciences, STEM fields that sort of cross into the territory of APSIA, all of those are preferred fields of study. So I think you're fine in this regard. Okay. Now I'd like to transition into talking a little bit about the post-Boren employment picture, because there's some really exciting opportunities here for those of you who want to pursue these careers. And I hope that this will make Boren attractive to you, because this makes you extra competitive for many of those jobs that you or your colleagues at the APSIA schools are already pursuing. After you've completed your degree, your Boren-funded study, we do want you to pursue a career with the federal government, and ultimately it is going to be your responsibility to do so. But we're going to provide you with a lot of significant advantages over other applicants for these jobs. The first and most important of these is that we have a team of people at the National Security Education Program that work specifically on finding positions that are only available to Boren alumni. Boren alumni are a very well-known commodity within the federal government. Like I said, we've been giving out this award since 1994, so you have people at the senior levels of many federal agencies who themselves came out of the Boren background. And so when an agency is looking for someone who is, say, an Asia trade analyst, or someone with an interest in cybersecurity, or someone focused on defense policy in Eastern Europe, they are going to consider listing jobs only for Boren alumni, because they know that they're looking for someone with that really deep regional knowledge, really deep language skills. So INSEP.net is this site that you are able to access as an INSEP alum and see job listings that are only available to you. So unlike the ones that get publicly listed in USA Jobs, where you may be competing against hundreds, if not thousands, of other applicants from the public, with the jobs that go on INSEP.net, you're only really competing against a handful of people who have the qualifications they're looking for and have not yet fulfilled their Boren service. So if the job is looking for someone with a master's degree who speaks Indonesian, and that happens to apply to you, there are not going to be that many other people in the pool who are also looking at those jobs. So the chances of getting them are very strong. Jumping down on the bulleted list, you'll see special hiring authorities. As a Boren alum, you are eligible not only for Schedule A. I feel like I'm getting that wrong. I think it's Schedule A. Schedule C are the appointees. Yes. For Schedule A hiring, you're also eligible for additional non-competitive eligibility for jobs that are funded through the National Defense Authorization Act. And that includes not only positions with the Department of Defense, but also with other agencies that get their money through that authorization. So even for those generally listed jobs on usajobs.gov, you have an inside track. We do have an annual federal employment seminar where we fly all of our program alumni to Washington, D.C. for a couple of days. We give them pointers on how to write a federal resume, and we have a job fair that features multiple different contractors and federal agencies. The last time we did that, we had 38 different agencies represented at the federal employment seminar. So again, Boren alumni are very much in demand, and they do send their senior hiring officials to talk to Boren alumni, and they'll collect resumes there. And I've heard anecdotally of many cases where folks have been called up on the basis of that exchange that they had at the federal employment seminar, and they were strongly advised to apply for a certain job. So, there's a lot of great networking also with the alumni network from Boren. So, like I said, many different incentives for folks who are interested in federal jobs to pursue them as Boren alumni. Now, we have what we call priority agencies. These are defined in the legislation. The priority agencies are where any job will fulfill the federal service requirement. So any job with the Department of Defense, be that civilian, military, or contract, will fulfill Boren's federal service requirement. Any job with the Department of State or under the authority of the Secretary of State, so that includes USAID and any of its contractors, will fulfill the federal service requirement. Any job with the Department of Homeland Security or any of its contractors, and any job with the intelligence community, including the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the FBI, and many others, NSA, NGA. So if you're at all interested in intelligence work, Boren is very well suited to you. So let me clarify one point. We had a question from someone asking about the year service requirement at an agency and how likely is it for agencies to hire Borens permanently, and is there an opportunity to do rotations like in the PMF? Let me just say that this doesn't exactly work like the PMF. It is certainly compatible with the PMF. So if you are applying for or receiving or in the running for the PMF, the work that you do as a PMF will count toward your Boren service requirement, right? It's work, it's with the federal government, it counts. But the jobs that you are going to receive as a Boren alumni, most of them are going to be permanent hires, or at least term hires of, say, like a 5-year period if you're a consular fellow with the State Department, for example. These are not one-year positions. These are either term positions or indefinite positions. So we're looking for people to land permanent work with the federal government. Now, once you are employed by the federal government, sometimes there are opportunities to do rotations, but more importantly, once you've got your foot in the door with the government, once you're on the federal pay scale, once you've got a security clearance, finding another job at another agency that you feel is a better fit for you is going to be that much easier. So even if your first job right out of Boren isn't exactly what you wanted, it's going to set you up very nicely for your ideal one. And before I go on, I do want to just add one more note. I know a lot of you are considering the Foreign Service. And I encourage you to pursue that goal. The Foreign Service is a terrific job, and it will take great advantage of the skills that you acquire in Boren and the skills and academic knowledge that you acquire in your university. But the Foreign Service isn't always hiring at the same clip. In recent years, it's been hiring very slowly, and it's been hard to get in when you want. But usually when there are slow periods of hiring, there will be fast periods again. And by the time you are a Boren alum, it's very likely that the rate of hiring with the State Department will be higher. But even if it isn't, already having employment with the federal government is going to build your seniority and your pay scale if you want to join the Foreign Service later. And it's going to get you that security clearance so that you don't spend months, if not years, languishing on the rolls waiting for a security clearance to come through. Having had another job with the federal government is going to make that transition much more smooth. Let me just talk really quickly about some of the other agencies that employ Boren alumni. Here, just a smattering. We have people doing research and administrative jobs with agencies like the Department of Energy, CDC, NASA. Many of you are probably aware that the Departments of Commerce and Agriculture have their own foreign services. So if you're kind of in that specific subset of diplomacy, that might interest you. For those of you who have Peace Corps in your future, a stint as a Peace Corps volunteer or working for the Peace Corps will count toward fulfilling your Boren service. So Boren's a great opportunity for you to kind of visit the country and gain a bit of a command of its language before going back there as a volunteer. So those are just a few of your options beyond the preferred agencies. I wanted to throw up another slide. This is one that I haven't shown anyone yet either. This information is available in the annual report that the National Security Education Program gives to Congress, but you have to do a bit of digging into the appendices. So I wanted to make a slide to show you where Borens end up. Now, these numbers are just a 3,970 person sample, so about a 4,000 person sample. The total number of Boren alumni is around 6,500 now, so we don't have data on everybody, and there are still some folks who have not yet fulfilled their federal service requirement who are in that group. So this is just looking at 4,000 people that we have records on for having fulfilled their federal service. As you can see, the Department of Defense is the most popular destination. The Department of State is very close behind it, and if you combine that with USAID, it's nearly the same. Of course, we have a lot of people in DHS, in the CIA and other intelligence community, and then you can see the other institutions that have the most recipients. The Department of Health and Human Services, for example, most of the people in that 70 actually work at the Centers for Disease Control. So most of those are coming out of a sort of medical sciences background. But this is just a way of saying that there are jobs out there everywhere. We love to hear from applicants who are interested in jobs in any of these agencies. Over 90 people have fulfilled their federal service with the Congress, with the legislative branch, either working for someone in the House or in the Senate or a committee, or working for the Library of Congress or the Government Accountability Office. So lots of opportunities. Anything federal is what we're looking for. That's basically the take home. If you want to find more information on these jobs, we really encourage you to visit the careers pages of various federal agencies. They've all designed these careers pages that are very well suited for folks who have no background in federal work. So I encourage you to do that research. All right, I want to give some time for questions. So I'm going to really skip through the format of the application quickly. We require 2 essays. We'd like 3 letters of recommendation. We want your transcripts for all of your collegiate level study. And if you are doing supervised research, we'd love to see a description of your overseas affiliation or a description of your study abroad program. We have 2 essays. The first essay is that really important one where you make that national security argument and where you connect it to a future career in the federal government. So it's very important that you spend most of your time focused on that essay. The second essay is where you describe your program plan. That can include both your research and your language, but the focus really should be on language and why the program is the right one for you. Don't focus too much on the nuts and bolts. The next application deadline will be January 29th of 2020. So obviously there's still a lot of time to start thinking about this, to talk to your advisors at your institution. You can search for those people on our website. And if you have any questions about deadlines, I can answer them later. But the most important thing, and hopefully someone who's on the line can reinforce this for me, but we respond to emails from prospective applicants and their advisors, and we will take phone calls during business hours at 1-800-618-NCEP. So please contact us early, contact us often. If you have any specific questions for your program. We're happy to answer all of them. And in the fall, we will start hosting a whole new wave of webinars, which may include changes to the program from what I've presented to you, but I expect it will stay fairly consistent. So that is all that I have to tell you at this stage. I do see that we have one question, but I just want to ask Carmen if there's anything she wants to add at this point.
No, Jeff, I think that's wonderful. And please, all of you, as you have questions, either as students or as those who counsel students, please feel free to put them in that chat box. It looks like Elise does have a question about the organizations that count, and I have some too. So you want to start with Elise's question about whether a place like USIP would be?
Yes, the U.S. Institute of Peace gets its money from the Congress. So there, or the Council on International Religious Freedom, or one of these other sort of quasi-governmental entities that is nevertheless government funded, yes, those will certainly apply. Now, my advice to you as an applicant is please don't put all of your eggs in that basket. USIP is a very small institution. It does not hire a lot of people. It's possible that you have an inside track there, you've got something working, you think that you'll get hired for whatever reason. Certainly substantiate that in your application if there's something more to be said about it. But I would encourage everyone to at least consider the opportunities that exist in the priority agencies, as well as other agencies of government that are within the sort of broad interagency effort umbrella of the topics that you're interested in, because I can't think of a single area of public policy that isn't worked on in some fashion at the Department of Defense or the Department of State. Certainly there's all sorts of intelligence work in those areas, and everything is affected by, you know, borders and travel and immigration. So there are a lot of opportunities in these agencies for you to do very similar work to what you might do at a place like USIP.
On a related note to that, you mentioned state, DoD, the IC, and their contractors.
Yes.
Are there limits on that, or how exactly does that fall into the service requirement?
Yeah, so just sort of, let's say you work for a consultancy like Deloitte. They have government contracts and they have non-government contracts. So if you go and work for them and 100% of your time is billed to a government contract, then 100% of that time will count toward fulfillment of the federal service requirement. If you are working 50-50 on government and non-government contracts, then you'll get about 50% credit. So it would take you 2 full years of that kind of work schedule to get up to the equivalent of a year of federal service. But yes, if it is a contract specifically, grants are not quite the same. But if it is a contract, then it will fulfill the service requirement. So if you go to work for a defense contractor, that counts. If you were hired to work at, say, a place like the Department of Energy, where many of the staff are technically contractors, from a distance, you probably don't look any different from someone who's direct hired there. And so we count that as federal service, even if you know your paycheck is technically coming through a contractor.
I see. I also noted that you mentioned the clearance process, which
Yes.
I'm sure everyone on the line knows has many joys and sorrows associated with it. How
Carmen,
much,
I lost you.
I said you mentioned the clearance process. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you talk about whether
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there assistance for Boren with the clearance process? Do they have to demonstrate that they could pass as part of their application to Boren? How are those two related?
No, we do not. We're not going to vet anyone's. We're not capable as IIE, the implementer for this program. We're not capable of assessing anybody's clearability. I mean, that's all kind of handled by the agencies themselves. So students should be aware that for many federal jobs, they will have to go through a federal clearance process, and that will vary depending on the agency. They do need to be comfortable with that possibility. But there are some federal jobs that do not require clearances, and so any of those federal jobs would fulfill the federal service requirement. I just think that most of the jobs, particularly ones with the State Department, the intelligence community, DoD, DHS, those are going to require some level of security clearance. And so people who are interested in pursuing those jobs, whether through Boren or not, should be aware of how those clearance processes work. But we do not provide any specific assistance. Now, let's say that a student receives the award and later is pursuing a employment with the federal government. They may get an offer of conditional employment, a conditional offer of employment, pending a security clearance. While that security clearance is going through, we strongly advise that the student continue to, or the alum continue to look for federal employment, because there is the possibility that one agency will either slow roll or decline a clearance, but another agency is fine with it. So students should not assume that they have the federal job squared away until they're actually working there.
Understood.
And I would say that advice is true even if you're not a Boren, even if you're not.
Again, as you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Otherwise, you have to keep listening to me, and no one wants that. Jeff, you talked a little bit about the numbers of applicants and the number of successful applicants. For the 2/3 who aren't typically selected, is there one place in those three parts of the application that usually trips up a candidate that those on the line should be really intentional about?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it really is an important one to drive home. One, I would say that the main weakness that both undergraduate and graduate applicants have is that they don't spend enough time addressing a potential career in the federal government. They don't come across as interested in it. They don't come across as having researched it. A lot of students will, in one sentence at the end of an 800-word essay, say, and then I'm going to go work in the Foreign Service for a year. That is not a good way to answer that question. The national security argument that you make, the interest that you have in a certain area of public policy, should really tie in directly to an interest in a federal career. And you should spend a good portion of that essay, a third to a half really, talking about your specific career goals. Those are the strongest applications that we see. One other thing that I would caution graduate applications on, and this is more of an issue with people who are, say, in PhDs and more traditional academic master's programs or PhD programs that are aiming for academia, is that they focus so much on their research that they neglect to address U.S. national security implications of that research. Now, when we read those applications, we kind of get a sense of where they were going with it, but they don't make the connection explicit. And if the connection isn't made explicitly, then we're not sure if they're aware of the connection. We're not sure if they understand the national security ramifications of the work they're doing, particularly when the description of a federal service interest is also not terribly well developed. So, really focus on national security and really focus on federal service. That's how you stand out from the pack. And excuse me, just to really drive this point home just a little bit more, you are students at schools that are focused on professional international affairs. You know how these agencies operate. You have done a lot of research on the interactions of governments, international agencies, various organs of the economy. Use that knowledge. Show that off when you're writing your application, that you understand where you are employable, where you are competitive. And the careers services counselors at your institution can be very helpful in making suggestions of where you should do some more research and how well prepared you are to pursue those careers. I see that we got another question in. Someone's asking about the flagship language initiative programs. So let me go back to that for just a second, and I will. The Indonesian and South Asian are pretty simple to explain, right? There is a summer and a fall overseas. Those are very much on rails. You are in the program, you are studying the language with the other students, they're arranging your housing, they've spoken for your schedule through the end of the fall, so basically to the beginning of December. At that point, you are able to continue studying that language and doing other research or internships as you are able to arrange yourself. As long as you stay in the same country and continue to study the language, it will be eligible for Boren funding. When it comes to the African, we have that set summer and fall program for the first three languages, French, Portuguese, and Swahili. For the other three, Akan or Twi, spoken in Ghana, Wolof, spoken in Senegal, Zulu, spoken in South Africa, you do have to participate in the summer program. You then have to find your own fall program, and you can optionally add on a spring program. As long as you are studying that language, you may do other things, but for those three languages, you do have to find a fall program. I hope that answered your question. If I can clarify that further, let me know.
Thanks again, Jeff. We have about 5 minutes left. I had a few other eligibility questions. You talked about U.S. citizens at the time of application. Do DACA students qualify, or is that a bit of a...
No, DACA students don't qualify, nor do LPR green card holder students. You need to have a naturalization certificate dated before the application deadline, which again, this coming year will be January 29th, 2020.
Great. And for the languages that you fund, for those who are native speakers or familial speakers of any of those critical languages, is that something that would also assist in their eligibility if they were born speaking English and Korean at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do see a lot of successful applicants that fit into those categories. Let me take the two kind of categories separately, and just say that there's sort of a good example and a bad example of each, and it's really about how you frame it. So let's start with a student who might be a naturalized citizen who really did grow up in the academic setting learning this other language. And I'll just use a Slavic language as an example because it has linguistic relatives. Let's say someone grew up in Poland, naturalized in the United States, speaks Polish as a first language, is also fluent in English now. They want to continue to study Polish. Now, if they pick a really rigorous academic discipline that takes advantage of their already very high fluent level of the language and enables them to build a subject matter vocabulary, practice their academic writing, etc., basically directly enrolling in courses at a Polish university, that might work. Another option that would also be attractive would be for that person to study a linguistic relative of Polish. Perhaps the interest in Polish has made them interested in other Slavic languages, so they could study Russian, they could study one of the languages of the Balkans. Those are another good opportunity for someone who's coming in with a background in another language. What we definitely don't want to see is someone who's a native speaker of Polish trying to enroll in a Polish course for foreigners. They really need to be making forward progress and taking advantage of the skills they already have. Likewise, with someone who sort of learned kitchen table Korean, let's use Korea as the example, they grew up hearing their family speak it. They probably have some reading ability, some writing ability, some speaking ability, but what they don't have is an academic command of the language. Then that's really where they need to start, is getting that level of Korean up to an academic standard, at which point they could then pursue what we were describing earlier with the Polish speaker, direct enrollment perhaps in courses using that language, internships or research using advanced application of that language. Does that all make sense?
That's a great and really nice counterpoint on how different students can approach it. So we have literally 1 minute left. So now is your time for furious typing if there's anything else you would like to pick Jeff's brain on. But as you can see, they're very open with sharing their contact information. And I can speak from personal experience and say very quick to reply on Twitter. So they're very good at social media replies as well. Thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope all of the students online will begin preparing to put forward their Boren applications, particularly by working with your colleagues in the career services staff. I hope my colleagues on the career services side will flag this as a wonderful opportunity for their students. And I look forward to seeing all of you at future APSIA webinars on different topics. Thank you especially to Jeff for sharing his wisdom with us. And I look forward to many more opportunities for partnership between APSIA and Boren.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you.